I'm Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called to Coach with special guest Angela Robles, recorded on April 4th, 2014. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches like Angela share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions or comments or even contributions during the show, we do have a live chat room available for you. We'd love to have you join us. It's right below the main video window. And if that is blank, check the issues section down there. I've got some troubleshooting tips for you if you're having problems. And you can now even pop out the chat. Look for the little red boxes in the upper right-hand corner. We make that all available for you. If you're listening to the recorded version, email those questions to us, coaching@gallup.com. And don't forget to visit the Gallup Strength Center, just gallupstrengthcenter.com for all your coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch this video in both streaming or downloadable audio for offline listening to past shows. And really, this is the site you need to know, coaching.gallup.com. A lot of our resources and links are out there for you as well. Jeremy Petrosini is our host today. Jeremy works as a learning and development consultant here on the riverfront, although he is home today. And Jeremy, it's great to see you, and welcome to another Called to Coach.
Great, thanks, Jim. Yeah, it's always great to be here. And if you're new to Called to Coach, just want to welcome you. We know that recently, actually, we just hit over 10 million people that have completed the Clifton Strength Finder. So it's always fun to know that there's more and more people every day discovering their strengths, and the real impact begins to happen when they have a conversation around their top 5 with a coach. So it's our passion at Gallup not just to continue to reach people, but we want to get to 1 billion people. And in doing that, we want there to be 1 million coaches like yourselves out there who are listening. And so whether you're an independent coach, whether you're somebody who's maybe just learning a little bit about Gallup and Strength Finder, or you're somebody who works within an organization, we're excited that you're here. And our guest today, as Jim mentioned, Dr. Angela Robles, she is a coach and in kind of multi-facets, right, Angela? So part of it is her specialty of being a strength coach is with professional athletes, collegiate athletes, coaches, teams, and so has done some really cool stuff around Strength Finder. I'm excited that you guys are going to get to hear a little bit more from her today. She's actually the president and founder of an organization called Forza Institute, which really exists to build strengths to lead toward performance. And so, Angela, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah, so tell us, I know you and I had a fun chat because some of our own strengths journeys align a little bit, but share with the listeners just how did you kind of fall onto this strength path? How did you kind of discover that journey of really being called to coach?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first it started years and years ago as a youth, just playing youth sports. Sports has been a huge part of my life growing up.
I see your little Notre Dame,
I do,
strategically placed there.
Yeah, the women are in the Final Four, so I had to represent that a bit. little Notre Dame Irish marketing in the land of Nebraska followers, I think, in Omaha. So growing up, sports was a huge part of my family. I played softball at Notre Dame, grew up in California, got a scholarship and pitched there. My younger sister, actually, she also scholarship pitcher, played for the University of Pittsburgh. Brother, baseball player at Kansas. My youngest brother did football at Fresno State, and now he's at USC. So it's just something we kind of lived and breathed in terms of our family and sports. I also, after college, ended up playing professionally overseas in Italy a bit, and then dabbled in college coaching for a couple years. In that time of college coaching, just trying to figure out if that was a path that I was going to do for the rest of my life, I started into Azusa Pacific's master's program and then ultimately the doctorate program in higher ed leadership. And in that doctoral program, as our orientation, we had to take strengths. And so Chip Anderson, who some of you might know, Dr. Chip, he was the one that actually first taught me strengths. And I was able to learn strengths from him, which I feel like was such a gift. When I remember getting my top 5 strengths, I think mentally I was prepared for doing this doctoral work and really looking at education, but the light bulb for me was really reflecting back on how these 5 strengths played out in my life as an athlete. My strengths are includer, woo, positivity, belief, and empathy. And when you hear those 5 strengths, you may not think, high competitive level athletics. I was really a relational player, so I loved just the team environment. That was what really motivated and drove me. And I remember with Chip, he talked a lot about this concept of the best, and how, the best of the best know their athletes, or know their strengths, and know how to build their lives around them. And I wondered if that was true for athletics. And so when it came time to do my dissertation, a year journey of this, I thought, what am I going to choose to study? And I really wanted to blend those two loves, my love for sport, but also this newfound love for strengths. And so what I ended up doing is, for a year, I studied the best of the best in sport. And I just happened to land in softball, since that was, my world and where I had the most relationships. And so I actually took 17 elite athletes. I looked at Olympians, pro players, college All-Americans, at the Division I level, and I had these young women take strengths, and I really wanted to find out, does that translate to their success in sport? If they're really the best of the best, do they utilize these strengths that they have in their sport as well? And across the board, every single one of them had a resounding yes. They all felt that they really tapped into those strengths to become elite and to play at that level. Also, with doing that, I found out, a lot of them talked about overcoming obstacles through their strengths, finding team roles that they fell into based on what strengths that they had. And so after that dissertation study ended, I thought it would be really neat to be able to bring that, to more athletes and to more coaches, because it's just such a great tool. And so I, about 5 years ago, started Forza, and have just had a great time being able to do this passion. I really feel like it's a calling, so I love the tie-in with Called to Coach, because it really is. It's a calling, I feel like, to kind of bring this new tool and this resource of strengths into the sport culture. And so, I've gotten to work with a couple teams at Washington and Arizona and Harvard, and it's been really neat to see these athletes grasp onto this concept and idea and be able to use this to enhance their performance and get to know each other on a team. So
so it's cool. I think part of what's fun with your journey is, again, your own discovery around your top 5, but then people will often ask, so if I took it at work, are my top 5 different at home or in sports? And I love that, like you mentioned, we'll let you talk a little bit about it too, but just kind of that you went in and began to study success, which, again, for people that are familiar with StrengthsFinder, know that that's exactly the approach that Don Clifton, who founded and developed, the assessment, where we're going with it, kind of studying what's right with people, was his, kind of mantra of what he lived to do, is to say, why focus on what's wrong when we can study what's right? So I'd love to hear some stories from you, and whether they're direct from what came from that research, or it could be just specifically to when you started using, StrengthsFinder, helping an athlete or a team think about their top 5. How did you see it really make a difference? How did you see it, again, everything you say with your business is it's about performance and improved performance. So give us maybe an example of a story or two of where you've really seen it be effective.
Yeah, sure. And I was thinking about, I was thinking, okay, what are some stories from the field, right? What are some stories from the sport field? And so one, I think I would love to share about performance, the second about engagement. And so I think with the first, in terms of performance, again, this was such a great, in coaching and in leading people through strengths, you have these wonderful moments where you're like, this is why I do what I do. And so I remember working with a team. I won't say the name of the team, but they were a top 3 program in the nation. It was for softball. The particular hitter was their number 4 cleanup hitter, best hitter on their team. And I remember the coaches sharing, they said, this athlete, she either hits a home run or she strikes out. I feel like, if this could be something that she can use as a resource or a tool for her, that would be fantastic, because they were kind of hitting the wall. And so she shared, as we unpacked her 5 strengths, 2 in particular that she felt really conflicted within her. And she had activator and she had strategic. And so she said, when I get up to bat, I just feel so torn inside, because I really want to be successful and I want to see a good pitch and hit it, but then my mind is just racing, and I'm thinking about all the different things that could happen. And so we talked about creating a game plan. In a sense, with baseball and softball, you have your on-deck circle, and we said, in that circle, be as strategic as you want to be. And then when it comes to walking in that batter's box, you are an activator. And so I think even just being able to unpack that and hear how she was resonating with it, and she felt like this could be something that could help her in terms of just navigate through not only the mental game of sport, but also using this idea of strengths and how she was innately made and what her talent was to be able to kind of negotiate what strengths to use at what moments in her performance. And so that was a really great moment, I think, just even as a fellow athlete, seeing someone identify with something that's going to really help them to perform at the best of their ability. So it was exciting. The second piece is about engagement. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to just interject one quick thing there too, and you probably heard Chip talk about this, but and I mentioned kind of that was the alignment for my journey too, of hearing Chip Anderson, who co-wrote Strengths Quest, saying, why wait till later in life or business? Like, let's help students figure this out. Let's, if you can play to your strengths in all aspects of life, why not? And he would describe your top 5 almost like cars in a garage. Mm-hmm. Right, and I think this is what you did with that specific athlete. He's like, you don't drive necessarily all 5 cars at once, and there are times where we see our strengths and our signature themes integrate. But I think when you can really be strategic about saying, all right, I'm walking into this party, do I need to leverage my woo and make sure it's there and it's out front, or strategic happening behind the scenes? And I think just you helping that individual athlete, and I know you've got probably a ton more stories like that with individuals, but just saying, all right, this is my time to be strategic, and now let's activate. And I think just intentionally, when people intentionally build on that talent, that's where it begins to turn into a strength versus just being that kind of potential within them, but now it really turns into performance. So.
Yeah, and I think as an athlete too, there's such a relief, there's such a sense of freedom to say, okay, now I can wrap my mind around why I felt so conflicted. I think that with that athlete, that's what she was struggling with, is why does this happen? Yeah. And so I think to mentally be able to navigate through, okay, it's because I'm gifted at both of these areas. When do I lean into one, and when do I quiet one, so I know how to perform?
Chip would say, grab the 4-wheel drive car or grab the convertible. Is it snowing outside, right? Or is it sunny? So
yeah, and I was a college pitcher.
Share the other story.
Me, I was a pitcher, so for me, I'm like, I need the race car.
Exactly.
Yeah. The other one I thought might be relevant was that this idea of engagement. I know from even just the study of these elite athletes, a lot of them talked about having a certain strength of their 5 that was sort of a resilient strength for them. So if they were an injured player, if they, in sport, especially in baseball and softball, basketball, I mean, you fail more than half the times that you attempt, and you're still going to be incredibly gifted athlete. So, you strike out 7 out of 10 times, but the other 3, you get on base, you have a pretty good average. And so how do you, as an athlete, bounce back? How do you fail? And then what do you use in your strengths that you can overcome those obstacles? And so I remember one particular incident. I was doing sort of a pilot study with this back at my alma mater at Notre Dame, and we did a team building retreat where we talked about strengths, and everyone was sharing about their top 5. And I could really sense, probably because I have empathy and includer, I could sense that one of these athletes was really disconnected. And hearing her story, it comes to turn out she had torn her ACL. She was the starting center fielder. She knew that season she wasn't going to be able to play. So just incredibly disengaged. And when we started talking about strengths, we found, she had the strength of command. So I think for her, she felt, I can't physically contribute to my team this year, so I'm not valuable. I'm not going to be an asset to this team. And so I think to build opportunities and strengths, to have that team building process take place is just so fruitful, because to hear her fellow athletes and teammates say, you have command and you have a presence on this team, and even if you're physically not in our lineup, you play such a critical role, and we really need you to step up, and we're not going to be successful without you. So to see someone who was completely shut down, who has command and this great gift of being able to as an athlete because they physically couldn't play, it was really neat to see that turnaround for her, and for her to say, I do have a place on this team. I can use the strength of command and still be a powerful contributor to the team, even if physically I have to wait until next year to be in the lineup. And so I think strengths, like I said, I really feel like there's such a great value to this in sports for your athletes that are third string athletes, or if they're injured athletes, or a freshman who's just waiting to have time to get in the lineup. I think that the roles that we enable our athletes to play or encourage them to play can really be highlighted in strengths, and I think that gives them a value and a place on the team, even if physically they're not going to be able to contribute at that time.
Yeah, well, and I just love, again, in sports, you're not on the team if you don't have something unique that you contribute, right? I mean, there's only so many spots on the team, especially when you get to the college level or professional level. I know you've worked with the Olympians. It's like there's a reason you're on the team, right? There's a reason you've kind of made that cut. And so I think even in this case where somebody was injured or redshirted, where they don't feel like I'm not playing, my role yet. I'm not on the field, playing catcher or center fielder or whatever it is. But I think that unique component you were able to help these individuals discover of when you discover kind of those innate God-given strengths, there's something you bring. Because again, it's not just about the can you hit or can you throw or can you catch or whatever the sport is, or in business, whatever the unique piece is. But there's thinking involved, there's personality involved. And so I'd love to hear you share with us too. I know you get to work with a lot of teams, a lot of coaches. Give us some of kind of just the tips and tricks that you've used to implement and help them really make strengths a key part of, again, the way that they see improved performance.
Yeah, for sure. And I think having been a coach too, I resonate with just being, as a coach, hungry for resources. There are so many different things that you can do in terms of team buildings. But as you were sharing, even as a coach, I remember struggling. I was a pitching coach at Long Beach State, and I remember thinking, you have 4 pitchers and you're working with your top 2, but how do you keep that 4th one, engaged and feeling part of it? So I really identify with when the coaches feel like they are looking for those resources, and that's why I really believe that Strengths is such a great tool for them to do that. What I've done with teams, and again, I still feel like as coaches we learn as we go, so this is definitely not the polished approach, but what has been really exciting for me is just sort of evolving what works and what doesn't work with teams and how they resonate with strengths. And so for sport, what's been really neat, what I've been doing with Forza is walking through a team process. If you're going to lead your team through strengths, an athletic team, I think the first piece is really identifying what those strengths are. So obviously having all of the coaching staff and the athletes take StrengthsFinder, but I also include team managers, your athletic trainer, your sports marketing person, anyone who's going to have a touch in that group and who would be a valuable person for the team to know and understand those strengths. I love including them in that. So really just walking through those 34 strengths and trying to give vignettes of when you've seen these strengths play out in elite athletes, so a younger athlete can look at a certain strength and say, gosh, that's a good example, I can tap into that too. So really just identifying what the strengths are, that first piece, empowering the athletes with that. I think the second piece is really looking at that team building component and being able to understand those around you. So as you're sitting with a team and everyone is sharing what those strengths are, I go back to Chip Anderson. I use his Genius and Beauty document that he has on strengths because there's such life in the way that he described these strengths. And so as a collected team, we have maybe one person on the team read that description, that genius and beauty of that strength description to another athlete. And then we have a conversation about why that particular strength is so valuable to the team, why they're going to be successful, because that person is contributing that. And so that's really where I see a lot of the life come from these athletes, feel engaged and feel like there's a reason and a role and responsibility for them to use that strength for that team's success. And then the last piece really is I do go back into strengths-based leadership and I look at the 4 domains and we look at how the team profile is affected by these collected strengths. And so I think that's been a really interesting piece too for athletes to look at and say, wow, we are really low on our team members having influential strengths, and I have one, I have woo. What now is my responsibility with my team to really capitalize on that strength to the betterment of my team? And so in really basic words, Jenny Allard was a head coach at Harvard, and I was explaining this process to her, and she said, it sounds like it's me, you, and us. And I said, that's exactly what it is. It's understanding your own strengths as an athlete, maximizing your performance through that, but then understanding those that you're working with, and then looking at that collective team, what is my greatest contribution based on my strengths? And so, so I'm excited to see what people do with it as we kind of pioneer this into sports even more intentionally. But yeah, I think it's a really applicable piece in terms of using strengths as a tool for team building as well as athlete performance. So.
Yeah, and I love, you know, again, that tool you referenced from the discovery we made in strength-based leadership, where we talk about, you know, that individuals don't necessarily need to be well-rounded, and actually if they are, sometimes they're just a great individual performer. But when you think about team, and even team is not just players on the field, but like you said, coaches and others involved. Again, you can apply this to business or other settings. It's more than just the people who sit around the table that make it happen. But it really needs to be the team being well-rounded. And again, in that research and strength-based leadership, we talk about those 4 different domains. That some strengths are more relationship building or strategic thinking or executing or influencing, like you referenced, and all 4 of those are critical even in sports. Another interesting thing, I'd love for you to talk about how your research, specific to athletes, maybe played out in this. In that book, it's like how we got to well-rounded teams is everybody kept asking Gallup, are there a specific top 5 of a CEO or a leader of an organization? And then we've heard the same thing in sales. Do people need to have woo in communications? Or in faith circles, I've heard people say, if you're going to be a pastor of a church, you need to have, certain
Belief.
top 5 belief. Yeah, and I've met a lot of pastors who don't have belief high, and they're like, oh, what's wrong? What's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
What did you discover? So as you looked at athletes, was it competition and focus? And what did you see or not see as you made those discoveries in your research?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll be really truthful in my answer. When I looked at these 17 elite athletes, and again, because my strengths are very relational and influential, I remember thinking the what if question. So looking at gathering all these strengths for these 17 Olympians and pro players, and I did have that question. I thought, what if they all have competition and achiever? Yeah. You talk about researcher bias, and I was like, please don't all be the same. Because what would that communicate then to coaches is that you're really looking for a one-type athlete. You're looking for a one-type coach to be successful. And so it was just really exciting kind of unpacking what the strengths were out of these 17 athletes. And again, even in just the last couple years of working with teams, I do not see a lot of crossover in terms of there's one particular strength that's most in common across the board every athlete has. In that study with the 17, not more than a handful of them shared even 3 in common. They were completely diverse. And I actually just put on the Facebook page for Gallup's Called to Coach, I put a quick snapshot of one of the most interesting comparisons of 2 athletes that I found from that study. There were two women, both had the primary first base position, both played in the Pac-10, both were All-American, Olympian gold medalists, national championships. I mean, these 2 women are really the forefront of our sport in terms of how successful they are. And I thought, I wonder if they're going to be wired the same. And they were so diverse. One had, achiever and deliberative and learner and competition. The other had belief and harmony and relator and connectedness. And so it was really neat to see even just this profile of these 2 women with completely similar backgrounds in terms of their success and even their sport and specific position, and yet they were completely different in terms of how they chose roles on the teams, how they were motivated. And so that's what's exciting for me about strengths, is I really feel like the opportunity to empower all athletes to be authentic and tap into your innate wiring and giftedness and use that to be successful. I think that's such a great freeing tool for athletes and for coaches to utilize.
So a question came in from chat that I think ties really nicely into what you just said, right? So it's not hey, we're looking from a recruiting standpoint for these 5 themes for a pitcher or a catcher or a first base. It's like it really is kind of what are the unique talents that this person has. The question came from David Tresh. He asked this question. He said, as a veteran of pro sports, what's been your experience in the relationship of coaches and their recruiting of athletes to teams?
Yeah, that's
so maybe talk a little bit about that, because it would have been nice if it was, boy, we just need to find somebody who's got empathy and can feel what's going to happen before it happens.
Right.
But that wasn't it. So talk a little bit about your approach, both as a coach and as you advise other coaches, to how they use strengths and go about recruiting athletes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm looking back, University of Washington was a team I worked with, and a number of years ago they just came off a national championship. They had the most well-rounded team in that strengths domains. I mean, they really had the influencers, the strategic thinkers, but we looked at their senior class, and out of 5 individuals, they had 4 activators, and then their next activator was a freshman. So we talked a little bit about, the next year you may feel the dynamics of the team change just on relationships, but also losing this really influential group, losing these activators. And so I think in terms of coaching, yes, it's not a tool that someone's going to say, I'm only going to recruit an activator, but when they know that that particular group of athletes, they are moving the team in such a direction that without them, there's going to be a gap and a hole to fill. I think in recruiting, you're going to look at your athletes on the field and what they contribute, but you also now will have a language to say, we need influential players. So maybe that is players who have just this attitude of, activation. Maybe it's those who have command. And so I think it gives them a way to look beyond just the physicality of what athletes are bringing and saying, we need to find these influential players. Or maybe our team is really in disarray and we need players, yes, who are very performance oriented, and we need the X's and O's, but we need relationship building people. We need athletes who, when we watch them play, we see them as very inclusive. We see them as relational. And so I think for a coach, like I said, I think it's a great tool to know the pulse of your team. And because teams change so quickly, every year you're going to look for a different type of athlete. But I just think it gives a lens into adding on not just the physical part that you need in a player, but really what do they bring in terms of their leadership style and the way that they're wired. I will share one thing that actually this coming Sunday I'm working with an organization of 250 athletes and coaches, and these are all high school kids, even through middle school, and so we're doing strengths with them as a recruiting tool for them to be able to better communicate to a college coach, this is who I am, because I remember my recruiting process, and I was on the phone at 16 years old with Ohio State and Notre Dame, and I thought, oh gosh, when they asked the question about, what kind of team player are you, or what are you going to contribute to the team outside of what we've seen you do on the field, that's a tough question for a young person to answer. That's a really difficult question for a high schooler to know how to articulate. So I think when you empower, on the flip side of this, even these young athletes to say, here's what you do on the field, but instead of being able to say, Coach, I hustle, Coach, I'm an activator, Coach, I really feel like I have this presence of command. What a gift to give young athletes in that recruiting process to know how to communicate their value to a college coach. So that's sort of what I feel like I'm moving into a little bit now, is being able to empower athletes even prior to coming to college and have this be one more resource that they can tap into when they're going through the recruiting process and trying to play at the next level.
Yeah, very cool. Jim, what other questions do we have out on chat?
Yeah, so, and you may have covered, the chat's been very active, and I haven't got to listen to everything, but Kurt, there were some questions going on. David asked this question, I wonder if self-assurance is a common talent theme for elite athletes, or does that make them less coachable?
For me personally, I've only seen probably 2 or 3 athletes that have it and maybe 2 coaches that have it. So I feel like it's pretty parallel to the research in that global ranking of strengths. I know I looked at the one that I think was just posted on Facebook, and self-assurance is a pretty low strength in terms of how common it is. I find that in sport as well. But I think for me, I feel like, too, again, it's just a great tool and resource to have as a language. So I'll answer that not necessarily in self-assurance, but with command and woo. I remember one particular coach in college had a really difficult player who was leading the team in the wrong direction. She had command and woo. And so I think being able to frame something, and you can do the same with self-assurance, frame it in a way of affirming that that athlete brings this great talent and strength, and then being able to coach them on the appropriate way to use that. And I think you can talk about the dark side of strengths, the shadow side of strengths. But that's it's a good conversation to be able to affirm the athlete and what they bring, and then say, because you have this strength of self-assurance, you have even more of a responsibility to use it in a way that's the most productive and healthy for our team. So again, I'm hoping that's answering the question, but I think it just gives a frame to address it in a really appropriate way and in a positive way, because that's what I think athletes will most respond to as well.
Very cool. Well, we lost Jeremy there for a second, so we'll hope it's you and me now. That's it. I get to ask all the questions now. But
okay.
Monica had asked also a little bit about your PhD. What's that in? Where's it from? And then let me add that kind of question of what was the journey that kind of led to that?
Yeah, sure. So it's an EDD, so it's a doctorate of education. It's in higher ed leadership at Azusa Pacific University, and I think for me it's funny because I look back on my 5 strengths and it makes a lot of sense why my journey was the way it was. The last year I did college coaching, I was at Long Beach State, and I loved our sport of softball. I loved coaching. I felt like I really wanted to work with a larger group of athletes, and so I was wanting to move into athletic administration, which makes sense, right? Includer, woo. I didn't want to just work with one team, but more of a broad group of athletes. And I think with the mindset of going into athletic administration or women's AD, I started that higher ed doctorate. But meeting Chip and learning strengths really changed the course of that life for me in terms of wanting to really do this for my life, wanting to do this as a vocation. So.
And then along those lines, what have you learned about coaching coaches, coaching athletes? I mean, if you were, certainly, I'm sure we'll have some listeners who are like, oh, wait a minute, maybe they're already running in those circles and they didn't put 2 and 2 together. What kind of advice would you give them? What kind of practical steps or some things for them to think about?
Yeah, well, I think first just knowing that it actually does resonate with coaches and athletes. I have not come across really anyone in sport who completely thinks that this is not a seamless connection. And so I think that just being confident and knowing that this does resonate with athletes, it does resonate with sport. I think in terms of tips, I would say just being able to do some coaching one-on-one with athletes that they know, coaches that they know, and kind of getting a feel for how they approach coaching the coach, how they approach coaching the athlete, and really, again, staying true to your own strengths. I know that I facilitate trainings in a much different way because I am built with includer and woo and positivity, and so someone who's more strategic might have a different way of being able to do that and have it resonate with teams. But in terms of just beginning, I think offering someone an opportunity to learn their strengths and just practice that coaching with someone who lives and breathes in sports would just be a good place to start, in that relational way, and then plan on how they can move into this more intentionally.
Yeah, and then Josh White, as a follow-up question, asks, do you ever go deeper than the top 5, as an example, using all 34 with student athletes so that it's a more representative of who they are?
I have not done that yet. No, I've really just looked at the 5. One thing that I have done is I've actually looked at spending some time talking about the shadow side, the dark side. So without looking at your bottom list of 34, but saying, okay, here are your strengths. When are they used for the best use of the team? When can they be overused, and how does that affect the dynamics of your team? But I really kind of land and stay in that top 5 at this point.
Jeremy, that kind of concludes it from the chat room at the moment. How do you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, I would love, Angela, you to share one more thing, and then I can kind of share, Jim, what's next with our next call. You mentioned something, even in regards to, again, focusing on top 5, but you mentioned something when you and I chatted earlier about, when you think of that sense of resilience, which you talked about earlier on the call, that most successful athletes actually still fail more than they succeed, right? And we kind of forget about that. We just think they're the best, but they fail like day in, day out in order to succeed. So you mentioned kind of this technique that you have them focus on what's your base strength, I think was the term used, that lets you bounce back. But talk to that just a little bit, because I do think that that's something that every listener on the call, whether they know athletes, connect with athletes, are an athlete, or just in their own life, when we face fails or struggles, how do we look at our top 5 and go, all right, of those 5, which one is going to help me bounce back and have a little bit of resilience?
Yeah, well, I think even in that initial study of those 17 athletes, that was, again, not even a question that I actually intentionally asked. Just through their stories, a lot of them did talk about, I feel like of these 5, this one is the one that I use the most in terms of, they use the term base strength. They said, this is really my base strength. This is one that I feel like anytime I fail in sport, or again, if I'm injured, or just have a tough day, this is the one I go back to. And I did, again, before we started our chat, was on the Facebook page, and I did put a quote on there that Michelle Smith, a 2-time gold medal athlete had shared with me, and she said, in these 5 strengths, these 5 talents, when you're at an event and they all are just flying on all cylinders, you're so lucky, and you're blessed at that moment to do that. But when you fail, it's almost like you have these stairs. You can always go back to this base, and this is the core and the gut of who I am. And I think, there's a lot of research in sport for athlete identity, and, that's such a struggle for athletes to really know, like, who am I? Yes, I'm a shortstop or I'm a point guard, but really, what can I dive into that's deeper than that? That's the core of me. And so as an athlete, myself, I feel like that's where I really can go back to, is I can say, for me, with these different strengths, my strength of belief, I've got to keep that as my base and core. If I go out and I have a poor event, what do I go back to? What's that ground level for me? And I think, again, just in terms of it being a tool for an athlete, it's a really cool resource. And I see a lot of the athletes just getting excited about going out and playing and being competitive, knowing I have this extra kind of unique tool and piece that I can use that is going to set me apart, as I play this game. So, yeah.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, and we'll keep you around. Though I know there'll be a few other questions post-show that we'll come back to. So, Jim, as far as what's next, and for the listeners out there, again, those of you who are fans of Called to Coach and log in or listen regularly, we will again be on again in 2 weeks on the 18th of the month, and excited again just to kind of continue to interview coaches as they share with us best practices, ideas, things that you can ingrain into your practices as a coach as well. So we also will be launching, and Jim, I'll let you talk about Theme Thursday that we started a few weeks ago, continuing to do that, but on the 15th of April, we are also going to be launching something that we call the Great Manager. There are some of you out there who are managers, and you listen because strengths is a great practice to engage in your own life, but also with your team. But based on requests of others, people have said, well, I'd love to just hear specifically from people managers who maybe aren't coaches, but just in their day-to-day life, they lead a team, they're held accountable to performance. Whether or not the team and the organization fails or succeeds is up to them. Let's hear from them. So we're going to start a call similar to this, where we're just interviewing, letting you all hear from managers who have been successful, have successfully led their teams, and just share some of those best practices as we go. So that'll launch on April 15th as well.
Yeah, and Jeremy, we've got a lot going on. If you're wondering how I keep up with all this stuff, head over to gallup.eventbrite.com. Everything we do is posted over there, and you can get registration links. Really, you only need to register so you get the reminder to come out and join us. It's always great to know you're coming. But Gallup.eventbrite.com. Jeremy alluded to Theme Thursday, and we've had 2 really good Theme Thursdays. And if you missed them, they're available at coaching.gallup.com as well. Kurt Liesfeld, Jeremy, and I get together and we talk. We take each one of the individual themes and just dive deep into it for 45 minutes with your questions as well. We have self-assurance coming up next Thursday. That's the 10th of April. And then Command coming up on the 24th of April. So those are every other week opposite of Called to Coach. So some things for you to do on Thursday as well. Jeremy already alluded to the Great Manager that's coming up on Tuesday the 15th. And then I'll remind you to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center. A lot of stuff that's out there, including all the links to everything we mentioned here. You can send us your questions or comments. If you'd like to guest a blogger as well, we're looking for one of those. Angela, maybe you could spend a... Have you guest blogged yet on coaching.gallup.com?
No, you know what? I think we have one that we put out there.
Very good. Well, and so if you're a coach and you're looking for a place you want to write something, let us know. It's always possible maybe to get your writing out there on the coach's blog. Send that to us, coaching@gallup.com, then put guest blogger in the subject line, and you can also catch the recorded audio and video of this after the fact. Plus all the ones we've done a bunch now, out at coaching.gallup.com. We want to thank you, Angela, for coming out and being a part of our program today, and we look forward to the next Call to Coach that's coming up in just 2 weeks from now. Angela, stay around. Everybody else, stay around a few minutes for a post show, but we'll say good morning, good afternoon, and good night, depending upon what part of the world you are in, and we know we have lots of folks from all over the world. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for being a part of Call to Coach. Goodbye. Okay. Connie says in chat, and Connie's a fellow Nebraska coach. She says, How does that time go so fast? It seems like we just started 10 minutes ago. Oh, yes, it does go fast. Jeremy, I have a question. I hear this a lot, that the strengths grid, the Excel spreadsheet that's out there. I know it's floating around the internet. I also know it's in the kits that we sell. Is that if somebody finds that online somewhere, is it okay if they use that?
Yeah, so a lot of, obviously when we published it, in the book with just kind of what are the 4 domains, it was real easy. I think even probably within moments, somebody who opened up Excel and said, all right, I'm just going to lay out my team this way. So there's a lot of different resources out there. One of the, you mentioned a couple times, Angela, Azusa Pacific. They've actually have some great resources that when Chip Anderson was there, really helping the entire university kind of focus around, how do we be strength-based. They've got great resources. There are some, Jim, on the Strength Center site, so people that have used the Gallup Strength Center site to purchase strength codes. There's some cool little team grids on there as well. But good. Easy. Again, whether you make your own in Excel, find one out there, or use Gallup's. There's a lot of great.
And I'll remind for as folks are heading back to maybe to work here at this point, we do have some meetups going on in various parts around the country as well. And those are changing all the time. So if you go to coaching.gallup.com and look in the meetups tab. And actually, that team grid has also been posted to the Meetup site. So I posted a link out there as well. If you want to grab that and download that, you can do that as well. We'll take any other questions for Angela maybe here in the last. I think we're on to something here, Angela, with this team angle, the sports angle on it. I really liked it.
Oh, I'm excited. Thanks so much for talking about it today. So yeah, like I said, it's been 12 years kind of permeating and growing, and so it's really exciting to see people connect with it and have it be just a good resource for people, but also I think a huge opportunity for coaches to move into that direction.
And you have an event coming up, right? I mean, you've got a big event coming up here in the next week or so?
Yeah, Sunday.
So talk a little bit about that. What's going to go on there?
Yeah, so it's with in softball, just as in any other sports, you have your club organization. So this is one particular club organization in the Long Beach, California area. This one club has 14 different teams on it. So on those 14 teams, there's about 250 athletes and coaches. They wanted to do a one-day kind of mental training day, and they thought strengths might be a good fit for that. And so we're doing 2 separate sessions. The morning session are for their athletes and coaches who are in like the 10 and under, 12 and under age range. So they've all taken Strengths Explorer. And so for me, this is the first time using Explorer to talk about these themes of strengths in sports. So I'm interested to see how that goes with these young athletes. The second half of the day will be the older athletes who are all probably 15 through 18 or 19, and they're all pre-college. And so we did Strengths Finder with them, and we're going to just do a day of unpacking what those strengths are and really looking at 2 components, looking at understanding their strengths and moving it into performance. How do they do that in their position? How can they use those strengths? But also the second piece is that recruiting component. How can they practice crafting their responses to coaches in terms of who they are as an athlete based on their strengths? And so that's the largest group that I've worked with in a one-day shot. So I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah, I love that piece too, Angela, of just helping them be able to articulate the value they bring. Because again, it's like they can talk about it probably specifically from, their actual skills on the field. But can they talk about it from kind of here's what's within me? I can't help but take leadership or speak my mind or say let's go, or I'm high woo and I just love to kind of build that camaraderie, team spirit. That's what I do. Win, loss, we're going to have fun doing it and we're going to feel like we're in it together. So I think teaching that value, especially I love. Obviously it gets more and more competitive, so you're down to 7th and 8th graders, talking to college recruiters, but helping them be able to articulate, here's how I'm naturally wired, I think is key. I'm actually going to be doing something similar with MBA students out at University of California in a couple weeks. But same thing, articulate the value you bring to the organization, and strengths gives you a lens to do that. So,
and I think truly my strength of empathy kind of arises a bit because I look at these athletes who, it's changed a lot. I was recruited in the mid-90s, early 90s, and so now kids are verbally committing to colleges in 9th grade. They really
you weren't text messaging with your future future coach, right?
No, but at 14, 15 years old, I never had to speak to a Division I top college coach and say, this is who I am, and so for me, I think, gosh, we're teaching these young kids all these sports skills. We need to give them and empower them a way to be able to do that so they're not just on their own trying to have this really important life critical, future critical conversation and just talking about I hustle, but so what a great way to give them the ability to say, yeah, coach, this is who I am, and this is with confidence too, to be able to say that, and then to be able to have a just really clear message to this coach and say, this is who I am and this is what I can bring. And if that helps more kids get to college and get their scholarships, I think it's fantastic. So
that's great.
Angela, Monica asks, how did your own strengths help you out during your dissertation process?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm laughing only because I remember sitting at a table with about 12 other doctoral students who we were ready to do our dissertation, and we were asked the question, how will your strengths help you finish this year journey? Because the dropout rate for people finishing their doctorates, is really high. And so I looked at my strengths and I thought, okay, I have empathy, positivity, woo, belief, and includer. And I thought, oh my goodness, typically, gosh, if I had discipline or focus, it would be really great. And so, so for me, it was really this, again, aha moment that I need people. I have to have people to be on this journey with me. So I included, family members in the process with me. I had them all take strengths so they knew what I was talking about. Empathy, I really thought about the people that I was studying, and I said, I want to tell their story, and I want to be able to research that. But I really, again, tapped into belief. I really, truly believed that even if I didn't have the natural bend to be, disciplined or focused, I had that core belief that this would matter. And so, I'll get a little choked up thinking about it, because here it is now, years later, and getting a chance and the honor to do this with teams, it goes back to the resiliency of finishing that year and that dissertation. And it truly was because I believed in what I was studying. I knew that there was no one at that point that had really looked at blending sports and strengths. And I thought, these stories have got to be told, because this is such a valuable tool for athletes to have. And that's really what kind of pushed me through to finishing that schooling with a 1-year-old and a husband. And it was a tough journey, but again, just tapping into those strengths, I feel like that's what got me through that. But just the core root of belief that studying this mattered. This is really something that will resonate with sport. I just truly believed it, and I believe it today. So it's exciting to get a chance. This is like, dream come true to get to share about these two worlds and how they can match so well together.
So Angela, the interesting thing too, and around strengths, is at the core of it is focusing on what's right with people versus what's wrong. Obviously, in coaching, you see a lot of different philosophies. There's kind of that coach that's more the aggressor of, I'm going to be in your face, but you're going to thank me when we're, celebrating the championship together. Have you seen or done research around that, kind of focusing on what's right, or coaches that create that positive piece? Again, especially when you get to the level of, athletes that you're talking about, a Michael Jordan or LeBron James know that they screw up, right? So I don't know that they need somebody to sit down and tell them what was wrong. But have you seen that approach, again, from coaching, of either focusing on what's right versus focusing on the negative, the impact that's had, whether you've studied it or read other studies on it?
Yeah, no, I think, again, there's no right or wrong way to approach coaching. I think for me, the way that I see strengths play out in it is that coaches who are really just that really tough-nosed, coach, I think with strengths, they realize they have to build a coaching staff around them that are going to be relational, are going to be bridge builders with their athletes. But I think, again, in that study I didn't share earlier, but a lot of them use the term shortcut. They're like, gosh, this would be such a shortcut on a team to figuring out why my coach does what they do. I think for me, again, a lot of athletes go through their college years. They finally feel like they get their coach or they get their teammates after 4 years of being together. But gosh, if you could figure that out the first year in, what a gift, and what you would just alleviate so much of the, I think just even in men's sports too, so much of the drama and frustration of trying to get to know how people work and why they do what they do. For coaches, I've seen them look at their team and look at the strengths on their team, and it's been such a good, quick insight for them to say, this one particular player, they're going to need me to ask about how their classes are going, how their family's going, because their strengths are very relational. Where this other one, if I do that, I'm going to lose them. They really need to know, this is what you want from me, and this is how you got to do it. And so I think just knowing their players better and more in a more intimate way accelerated the process for them to know, I know what buttons to push on which athletes. But also building their coaching staff. I think it really helped them be authentic to who they are. So if you are not a woo coach, hire a woo assistant, who's going to do that for you. And then you get to live in your sweet spot. You get to live in the strengths that you have, and that's where I feel like you find the coaches who are truly the best of the best. They know fully who they are, and the players are very comfortable in playing for them because they're not mimicking any other coaching style. They truly know authentically, this is how this coach is wired. So
cool.
Well, let me wrap it on this. So David Tresh said this, and so Angela, a little bit of encouragement to you. He says this in the chat. He says, Angela, having worked as a trainer with the 1980 Olympic team, although they did not get to go, those were the Moscow years, and then as in pro baseball in the 1980s, I wish I had been more in tune with this. I look back and see how people's natural strengths played into this without them even knowing. Thanks for putting some research behind and confirming what I saw through the years. So nice job, Dave. Thanks for writing that. And Angela, thanks for coming in. With that, we'll wrap this up. Thanks for coming out and being a part of the webcast today. And again, we're back here next Thursday for Theme Thursday. Thanks for watching, everybody.